is Friday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. In this week's video, we're going to look at the Vigilance Keyword ability. This ability makes it so that your creatures don't tap when they attack. The ability has been around as long as Magic has, but it wasn't made into a keyword ability until Kamigawa block. Most creatures with Vigilance are white, and flavor-wise, it seems to represent that a creature never lets their guard down, even to attack. There are over 300 cards in Magic that either grant Vigilance or have Vigilance, and in this video we're going to narrow it down to the top 10 that have made the biggest impact on Magic's competitive scene. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score these. Pro Tour, Legacy, and Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and Grand Prix top 8s are worth 1 point. Now, on to number 10. At number 10, we have a Charm. Selesnya Charm. Like all charms, it gives you several choices. One of the choices it gives you is creating a 2/2 knight with Vigilance, and that's the part that helps it make this list. The flexibility that charms like this have is excellent if you need it to be. It can be a combat trick or a removal spell for a really big creature. Still, the most frequently used mode is creating a 2/2 knight with Vigilance at instant speed, which is a pretty good deal. It saw play in Return to Ravnica block and Standard in Selesnya aggro decks, and in Standard it also saw some play in Naya aggro. It has never seen play in non-rotating formats, so its spot on this list could be in jeopardy going forward. At number 9, we have a Planeswalker who can give Vigilance to your whole team, and that is Ajani Goldmane. One of the original Planeswalkers from Lorwyn, Ajani's main application has been in aggro decks, where his -1 is a powerful way of pumping your entire team, while also making sure that your creatures, usually a token army, can also stay back and block. In Block Constructed, this primarily meant Kithkin decks, and in Standard, this was in black-white token decks. It hasn't seen any play since rotating out of Standard, though, and I don't think it's super likely that it will, so if we see another really strong card with Vigilance debut at some point, both 9 and 10 on this list might be in a little bit of trouble. At number 8, we have a creature who says Vigilance in its text box a whole bunch of times, and that is Brimaz, King of Ereskos. He really takes advantage of having Vigilance, since he gets to make a cat token with Vigilance when he either attacks or blocks, and that really creates a problem for your opponent. This guy is obviously incredible, and he was a very pushed Mythic Rare. In Theros Block Constructed, he picked up 2 Pro Tour top 8s in 2014, and in Standard he showed up in both Control and Aggro decks, not something that a 3-drop creature is always capable of. But the sheer power level and value of Brimaz made him a good card in Control decks too. In Standard he appeared in Orzhov Control and Blue-White Control, but by the end of 2014 he transitioned into exclusively being in aggressive or mid-range decks, including Abzan, Boros Aggro, White Weenie, and so on. Brimaz also managed a couple of modern Grand Prix top 8s, both in Hate Bear decks, one in 2015 and one in 2016, and in 2016 he found his way into a Legacy Death and Taxes deck, which is basically the Legacy version of Hate Bear, but he's only managed the 1 GP in that format, and it's been a little while since he's seen play. At number 7 we have Elesh Norn, Grand Cenobite. To be fair, in this case Vigilance isn't really a huge part of the card. The main thing is that it basically destroys your opponent's board while bumping up all of your guys. Sure, Elesh Norn can attack for you if you need that to happen, but most opponents just give up in most cases when the thing hits the table, especially because most people are cheating it into play. They're not paying 7 mana for it. In Standard, this involved Unburial Rites or Birthing Pod. In Modern, it doesn't see a ton of play today, but it used to see play in Tron decks and Gifts Ungiven Control decks, which also used Unburial Rites to bring Elesh back. Legacy and Vintage are, of course, the formats with the most ways to cheat creatures into play, and Elesh Norn has had a good time there, seeing play in both Sneak and Show and Reanimator decks. At number 6, we have a card that has had a very recent uptick in popularity, and that is Mantis Ryder. 3 mana for a 3/3 with 3 keyword abilities is a pretty great deal, and as a result, the Ryder saw a lot of play in Standard, primarily in Jeskai decks, which were in those 3 colors in large part because of Mantis Ryder itself, which at the time was up there with Siege Rhino as one of the best creatures in Standard. However, after rotating out of Standard, it didn't look like Mantis Ryder was going to do much, and it went all of 2017 without seeing any competitive play. But then 2018 came along, and in Ixalan block, new cards were printed that enabled a new modern deck, 5-color Humans. The deck quickly rose to prominence with 2 Pro Tour top 8s in February, and it has since remained a Tier 1 deck in the months since then, and it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere anytime soon, so you can expect the Rider to continue to climb up the list for the foreseeable future. At number 5, we have the only card on this list still in Standard, and that is Heart of Kirin. Several vehicles in Kaladesh block proved to be incredibly powerful. Smuggler's Copter even had to get banned. Heart of Kirin is now the greatest vehicle in Standard. It has a reasonable crew cost that can actually be paid by a Planeswalker's loyalty counter too in a pinch. Heart of Kirin was especially good alongside Gideon, ally of Zendikar, because Gideon could make himself into a creature and still crew the heart with a loyalty counter all in one go. Anyway, this card is basically the vehicle version of Sarah Angel, and it has done a ton of damage in aggressive decks, some that are heavier in the vehicle theme and some that just aren't. While its rate of play has decreased since Gideon rotated, the heart is still a force in Standard, and a card you should be ready to face there. At number 4, we have the only card on this list that isn't at least partly white, and that is Sylvan Advocate. A 2-mana 2/3 with Vigilance is nothing great, but it does mean that the Advocate can't be killed by cards like Shock. It eventually becomes a 4/5 too. Basically, it was Standard's Tarmogoyf for a while, which put it out of the range of Languish while they were both in Standard, which was pretty good for a 2-mana creature. Sylvan Advocate benefited from being in the same color as Collected Company and a card that the Collected Company deck could hit, and that is where it saw most of its play, but it has seen play in a lot of green deck when it was in Standard, including Abzan, Selesnya Tokens, Gruul Ramp, and Black-Green Constrictor. Since rotating out of Standard, it hasn't seen play in any non-rotating formats, and it seems unlikely to see play in Modern, where decks don't have to jump through as many hoops for a 2-mana 4/5. All they have to do is play Tarmogoyf, basically. At number 3, we have a creature land from the plane of Zendikar, Celestial Colonnade, which is probably the strongest of the cycle of creature lands from that plane. It brings evasion and vigilance, and the vigilance part makes it interesting because you can attack with this and still leave mana up on your opponent's turn. It's an incredibly powerful land, and this has led to the Colonnade being a win condition in many blue-white control decks in multiple formats, since once the control player gets to the right number of lands to continue to leave up counter magic and other interaction while still being able to turn the Colonnade into a creature, they just start bashing away for 4 every turn, and there isn't a lot you can do about it. There aren't a lot of lands out there that can claim to be able to win the game on their own, but Celestial Colonnade is one of them. It was heavily played in standard blue-white control decks and showed up in the various versions of Caw-Blade both before and after the banning of some of the key cards in the deck. In Extended, it saw play in blue-white control and in Fairies. It continued to see play in Modern, the format that replaced Extended, showing up in control and Caw-Blade decks there too, and it is a key card in the blue-white control decks that have been putting up decent numbers in Modern here lately, including a Grand Prix top 8 already this year. Several players got close to a top 8 with blue-white at the recent Modern Pro Tour, but it didn't quite make any top 8s there. In Legacy, it even has one Grand Prix top 8, though it seems to have been a bit of a fluke as it was a few years ago in a Stoneblade deck, and there aren't any versions of Stoneblade that run the card right now. Still, it continues to see play in Modern and probably won't stop anytime soon. At number 2, we have Archangel Avacyn. The moment she was spoiled, everyone knew she would see play. Basically, every block has at least one pushed card, and this is pretty crazy. At least for Standard it was. 5 mana for a 4/4 with Flash, Flying, and Vigilance that makes your board indestructible when it comes into play is already really good. But once another non-angel dies, she does 3 to the whole board and transforms into Avacyn the Purifier. She saw play in most decks that could cast her, basically, at least in the sideboard, and she never ceased seeing play in Standard after she was printed. When she first came out, she was in Bant Company decks and Selesnya Token decks. When those decks rotated out, she moved to Orzhov Control, Blue-White Flash, and Mardu Vehicle and Mardu Ballista decks. She has since rotated out of Standard and hasn't found a home in non-rotating formats, and at 5 mana, that may be asking a little too much. But at the same time, I wouldn't be too shocked to see her find her way into some modern deck lists. And at number 1, we have some equipment that grants Vigilance, and it's so good that it's been on my top 10 lists on a single card type of artifacts. It took the number 1 slot on my list on Lifelink, and it can add another number 1 to its resume here, and that is, of course, Batterskull. Batterskull was an incredibly strong card because for 5 mana it gave you a 4/4 with Vigilance and Lifelink, which is an okay rate, but on top of that, you could return Batterskull to your hand if the creature it was equipped to died. You could also, of course, equip it to some of your other creatures, and it became especially powerful once people decided it would be a good idea to pair it with Stoneforge Mystic, who could allow you to search up the Batterskull and then cheat it into play on turn 3, and that's when it's really broken. The pair combined in one of the most broken Standard decks ever, Caw-Blade. Stoneforge Mystic and Jace both ended up getting banned out of Standard in June of 2011, and they were 2 key cards in the deck, but Batterskull did continue on without them, still finding play in a variety of decks since his stats were so good and difficult to race. The primary place it saw play was actually in control decks, since it provided a win condition that was difficult to deal with and could put you out of range of aggro decks thanks to the life gain. But he still saw play in aggro decks too as a top-of-the-curve threat. Batterskull sees play in Modern, primarily in sideboards as a good sideboard card against aggro decks, where the life gain can make it difficult for them to kill you, and also as a way for control decks and combo decks to side into a more creature-based strategy. The Skull has seen mainboard play in Modern, though, especially in Blue Moon decks, where it's one of the primary win conditions after you lock your opponent out of all their mana. In Legacy and Vintage, Stoneforge Mystic is still legal, and that means that Batterskull is a good card there, and so it still sees play regularly in those two formats. That does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.